My name echoed through the speakers while 300 strangers clapped for me instead of my own father. I kept telling myself he was stuck in traffic, that any minute he would burst through those doors breathless. The seat beside my stepmother stayed empty the entire ceremony, a folding chair holding nothing but cold air. Later, I learned my father was sitting in bleachers watching my stepbrother pitch a meaningless summer league baseball game. That single afternoon became the moment I finally understood exactly where I ranked in my own family. My name is Rachel Monroe, and I grew up believing loyalty was something you earned through blood, not convenience. My mother died when I was 9, leaving my father to raise me mostly on his own for years. 3 years later, he married Diane, a woman who arrived with a 10-year-old son named Tyler. From the very first dinner, I noticed how quickly my father's attention shifted toward his new blended family. Diane praised Tyler constantly, calling him gifted, special, destined for something greater than the rest of us. I tried hard to fit into that new family, cooking dinners, cleaning rooms, hoping someone would finally notice me. My father worked long hours at his hardware store, coming home tired and short on patience most evenings. Whenever Tyler struggled with homework, my father dropped everything immediately, sitting beside him for hours without complaint. Whenever I struggled with anything, I learned quickly to solve it alone before anyone even asked what happened. By 16, I had become an expert at disappearing quietly whenever tension filled our small suburban house in Ohio. I threw myself into schoolwork, earning scholarships, awards, and a reputation as the responsible, dependable daughter everyone relied on. Meanwhile, Tyler skipped classes, failed tests, and still received brand new sneakers every single time he asked politely. I told myself this was simply how blended families worked, that comparisons like these meant absolutely nothing important. Deep down, though, something small and painful kept growing quietly inside my chest every single passing year. I graduated high school with honors, and my father actually showed up, sitting proudly in the third row. That single memory kept me hopeful that maybe things between us would eventually improve as I grew older. College acceptance letters arrived 4 years later, and I chose nursing school specifically to make my father proud. I worked 2 part-time jobs alongside classes, refusing to ask my father for a single extra dollar. Tyler, meanwhile, dropped out of community college twice, yet somehow always landed another new truck in the driveway. I noticed these patterns, filed them away quietly, and kept moving forward without saying anything out loud yet. Nursing school demanded everything from me: sleepless nights, brutal exams, and constant emotional exhaustion I rarely discussed with anyone. Still, I pushed through because graduation day represented something enormous, a milestone proving my years of sacrifice mattered. I imagined my father sitting in that audience, finally seeing me as more than just the quiet, easy daughter. 3 months before graduation, I called him excitedly, reading him the exact date, time, and ceremony location twice. He said, sounding distracted, that he wouldn't miss it for absolutely anything in the entire world that year. I believed him completely, because, after everything, I desperately wanted to believe my father truly meant those words. 2 weeks later, Tyler announced he had made the Regional Adult League Championship game on that exact same Saturday. Diane immediately began planning a celebration barbecue, inviting neighbors, cousins, and coworkers to watch Tyler's supposedly historic moment. I mentioned gently that my nursing graduation fell on the identical afternoon, hoping someone would notice the obvious conflict. My father laughed it off, saying graduations happened every year while championship games came around far less often. I felt my stomach tighten, though I told myself surely he would find a way to attend both events. As the date approached, invitations for Tyler's barbecue multiplied while my own family group chat stayed eerily silent. I sent a formal reminder with parking details, seating information, and my exact graduation time clearly written down again. My father replied with a thumbs-up emoji, nothing more, nothing reassuring, nothing that resembled genuine excitement whatsoever. Something inside me sank quietly, though I refused to let myself imagine the worst possible outcome just yet. The night before graduation, I laid out my cap, gown, and tassel across my apartment's small wooden dresser. I called my father one final time, my voice trembling slightly as I asked if everything was still confirmed. He hesitated for several seconds before saying Tyler's coach had specifically requested every parent attend without any exceptions. My hands went cold as I realized what he was actually trying to tell me without saying it directly. I asked directly whether he was choosing a baseball game over his own daughter's college nursing graduation ceremony. He sighed heavily, saying he could watch my graduation online later, but Tyler needed him there in person. That sentence replayed inside my mind for hours, cutting deeper than anything he had ever said before. I hung up the phone quietly, sat on my bed, and cried until my pillow felt completely soaked through. The next morning I dressed alone, drove alone, and walked into that auditorium carrying an emptiness nobody else noticed. Friends waved excitedly toward proud parents holding balloons, flowers, and handmade signs celebrating years of hard academic work. I smiled for photos, pretending everything felt normal, while searching every unfamiliar face for one that never appeared. When they called my name, I walked across that stage, diploma trembling slightly inside my shaking, sweaty hands. I glanced toward the audience one final desperate time, confirming what I already painfully knew deep in my heart. My father was not there, and neither was Diane, though I never truly expected her presence anyway. After the ceremony, classmates hugged their families tightly while I stood awkwardly holding flowers I had bought myself earlier. I drove home in silence, diploma resting on the passenger seat like a quiet, painful, unwanted passenger beside me. That evening, Tyler posted photos online showing my father cheering wildly, arms raised, celebrating a meaningless summer league victory. The caption read, "Proudest moment ever," tagged with 3 exclamation points and a photo of them embracing tightly. I stared at that photo for nearly 20 minutes, feeling something inside me shift permanently and quietly forever. I did not respond, comment, or call anyone that entire night, choosing silence instead of confrontation for now. 2 days later, my father finally called, asking casually how graduation went, as if nothing unusual had happened. I told him honestly it went fine, though something inside me had changed permanently after that specific day. He apologized briefly, blaming scheduling conflicts, promising to make it up to me sometime soon in the future. I accepted his apology outwardly, though privately I began building an invisible wall between us that grew stronger daily. Over the following months, I focused entirely on my nursing career, landing a position at a respected local hospital. I moved into my own apartment, paid my own bills, and rarely mentioned my father's absence to anyone else. Life continued moving forward, though that graduation day remained a quiet wound I carried beneath my professional confidence. Then, nearly 8 months later, my father called again, sounding nervous, asking if we could meet for dinner soon. I agreed cautiously, curious about what could possibly prompt such an unusual formal invitation from him after everything. We met at a modest diner near his hardware store, the same place we used to visit when I was young. He looked older than I remembered, tired lines etched deeply across his forehead and around his weary eyes. After small talk, he finally admitted the hardware store had been struggling financially for nearly 2 entire years. He explained competition from larger chains had slowly destroyed his customer base, cutting his income almost completely. I listened carefully, feeling genuine sympathy despite everything, because business struggles were real and deeply stressful for anyone. Then he said something that completely changed the entire direction and meaning of our conversation together instantly. He asked if I could help fund his retirement, since Diane's part-time job barely covered their monthly expenses. I sat there stunned, processing exactly what he was requesting after everything that had happened between us recently. He explained he had already spent most of his retirement savings covering Tyler's truck payments and college attempts. My chest tightened as I realized where years of sacrifice, patience, and quiet resentment had finally led me today. I asked carefully how much money he actually needed, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. He mentioned a number that represented nearly my entire annual nursing salary, spoken casually like it meant nothing. I asked why Tyler couldn't help contribute, since he was older, employed occasionally, and living rent-free at home. My father hesitated, saying Tyler had his own financial struggles and couldn't be expected to shoulder that burden yet. Something inside me finally snapped quietly, though outwardly I remained calm, controlled, and dangerously composed throughout dinner. I told him I needed time to think, then drove home, replaying every unfair moment from my entire childhood. That night, I opened an old shoebox containing photographs, report cards, and letters from my childhood years carefully. I found my nursing school acceptance letter, the one my father never actually read when it originally arrived. I found birthday cards from Diane, addressed only to Tyler, forgotten accidentally inside boxes meant for shared family memories. Something about seeing these physical reminders together made the pattern impossible to ignore or rationalize away any longer. The following weekend, I visited my Aunt Carol, my late mother's sister, seeking perspective on my father's strange request. Aunt Carol listened quietly, then revealed information about my father's finances that completely changed everything I previously understood. She explained my college fund, established by my mother before she died, had mysteriously disappeared years earlier without explanation. My stomach dropped as she described legal documents she had discovered while helping settle my mother's estate long ago. Aunt Carol had always assumed my father used that fund appropriately, until recent conversations revealed troubling inconsistencies between accounts. She suggested I request official bank records before agreeing to anything involving my father's retirement funding request whatsoever. I thanked her, though my hands trembled as the full weight of her words settled slowly into my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep, staring at my ceiling while questions multiplied faster than I could possibly answer them. The next morning, I contacted the bank where my mother's trust had originally been established years before her death. After providing identification and legal documentation, a representative agreed to review historical records dating back over 15 years. 3 days later, I received copies revealing withdrawals my father had made from my college trust without my knowledge. The withdrawals began exactly when Tyler entered community college, continuing steadily until the entire trust fund disappeared completely. My hands shook holding those papers, understanding finally why my scholarships had felt so desperately necessary throughout college. My father had used my mother's money, intended entirely for my education, to fund Tyler's failed academic attempts instead. I sat alone in my apartment for hours, staring at numbers representing years of quiet, calculated financial betrayal. Anger eventually replaced my initial shock, though I forced myself to remain patient before confronting anyone directly yet. I began gathering additional evidence, requesting further bank statements, tax documents, and legal records connected to my mother's estate. Each new document revealed another layer of betrayal I had never suspected during all those years growing up together. I discovered Diane had actually known about these withdrawals, signing certain documents alongside my father years earlier secretly. This meant both of them had knowingly benefited from money legally belonging to me since childhood without ever telling me. I contacted a family law attorney recommended by a coworker, explaining everything calmly during our initial consultation meeting. The attorney confirmed the withdrawals likely violated the trust's original legal terms established carefully by my late mother. She explained I had legitimate legal options, including potential recovery of funds through formal civil court proceedings eventually. However, she also mentioned that public exposure sometimes achieved faster, more meaningful results than lengthy, expensive court battles. I considered this carefully, remembering every dismissed feeling, every skipped milestone, every excuse made throughout my entire childhood. I decided confrontation needed to happen publicly, somewhere my father could not minimize or dismiss the truth afterward. Diane's 50th birthday party, scheduled 3 weeks later, would gather nearly every relative and family friend we knew. That event, I realized, would become the perfect setting for revealing everything I had recently discovered about my trust fund. I spent the following weeks organizing documents chronologically, creating clear copies, proving every single unauthorized withdrawal from my account. I printed bank statements, trust documents, and Tyler's tuition records showing exactly where my inheritance money had actually gone. I also gathered photographs from my graduation day, contrasting them against Tyler's championship celebration photos posted the same afternoon. My attorney reviewed everything carefully, confirming my documentation was solid enough to withstand any challenge or denial afterward. I practiced what I would say, keeping my language calm, factual, and completely free of emotional exaggeration whenever possible. 2 weeks before the party, I visited Aunt Carol again, asking if she would stand beside me during confrontation. She agreed immediately, saying she had waited years for someone to finally hold my father accountable for his choices. I also reached out quietly to my childhood friend Megan, a paralegal who offered to review my documents professionally. Megan confirmed everything looked legitimate, organized, and legally sound enough to present confidently in front of witnesses. The night before the party, I laid out every document neatly inside a professional folder labeled simply with my name. I barely slept, replaying countless scenarios of how my father might react once everything became impossible to deny. The morning of Diane's birthday party arrived warm and sunny, exactly the kind of day everyone expected for celebration. I dressed carefully, professionally, wanting to look composed rather than emotional when the confrontation eventually began that afternoon. Aunt Carol picked me up, gently squeezing my hand, reminding me I deserved answers after years of quiet suffering. We arrived at Diane's backyard, already decorated with balloons, string lights, and tables filled with catered barbecue food. Tyler greeted us casually, oblivious to what was about to unfold within the next several tense hours ahead. My father hugged me stiffly, clearly still uncomfortable since our previous unresolved conversation about funding his retirement plans. Diane thanked everyone loudly for coming, laughing brightly, completely unaware her carefully planned celebration was about to change forever. I waited patiently, watching guests mingle, eat, and enjoy themselves while I mentally prepared for the moment ahead. After the cake was served and gifts opened, my father stood, tapping his glass, requesting everyone's brief attention. He thanked Diane publicly, mentioning how grateful he felt for their blended family and everything they had built together. Something about his casual, confident tone made my decision feel even more necessary and long overdue than before. When he finished speaking, I stood up calmly, asking if I could also share something important with everyone present. The backyard grew quiet as relatives turned curiously, sensing something unusual in my steady, deliberate tone of voice. I thanked Diane for hosting, then turned directly toward my father, holding my folder firmly against my chest. I explained calmly that I recently discovered troubling information regarding my mother's trust fund, established before her death. Gasps rippled through the crowd as I described withdrawals made from my educational trust without my knowledge or consent. My father's face turned pale, his eyes darting nervously between me and the relatives now watching him closely. I presented copies of bank statements, distributing them among close relatives seated nearest to the main dessert table. Aunt Carol confirmed publicly that she had helped uncover these documents after noticing inconsistencies during recent conversations together. My father attempted explaining that the money had simply been redirected temporarily to support Tyler's education during difficult times. I calmly reminded him that trust documents specifically restricted usage exclusively toward my educational expenses, not anyone else's. Diane's face flushed red as relatives realized she had likely known about these withdrawals for several years already. Tyler stood silently, visibly shocked, realizing his truck payments and tuition attempts had been funded through my inheritance. I explained that the same year my father skipped my graduation, he was still actively spending my remaining trust. Relatives murmured uncomfortably, several shaking their heads while others whispered quietly amongst themselves near the decorated tables. My father tried apologizing, saying he intended to eventually repay everything once his hardware store improved financially again. I told him calmly that intentions meant little compared to 15 years of documented, deliberate financial betrayal against me. I then revealed his recent request that I personally fund his retirement, despite everything he had already taken from me. Several relatives gasped audibly, clearly stunned by the sheer audacity behind such an unreasonable, entitled financial request. Diane attempted defending him, saying families should support each other regardless of past mistakes or financial complications. I responded firmly that support required honesty, something noticeably absent throughout my entire relationship with both of them. My Uncle Frank stood up, saying he always suspected something felt wrong about how differently Tyler and I were treated. Other relatives nodded quietly, admitting they had noticed similar patterns but never felt comfortable addressing them directly before. My father sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair, visibly overwhelmed by the accumulating public scrutiny. I explained I had already consulted an attorney regarding potential legal action to recover funds legally belonging to me. The backyard fell completely silent as everyone processed the seriousness behind my calm, measured, legally grounded statement. Tyler finally spoke, admitting quietly that he never realized where his tuition money had actually originated from over the years. He apologized directly to me, saying he felt genuinely sick knowing my inheritance had funded his repeated academic failures. His apology, though unexpected, felt sincere enough that something inside my chest loosened slightly for the first time. My father remained silent, staring at the ground, unable to offer any meaningful defense against the documented evidence. Diane eventually admitted quietly that she had encouraged withdrawing the funds, believing family finances should remain flexible and shared. I told her calmly that flexibility without consent was simply another word for theft, regardless of family relationships involved. Several relatives began leaving quietly, clearly uncomfortable witnessing such a raw, unresolved family conflict unfold during a birthday celebration. Aunt Carol placed her hand gently on my shoulder, whispering that I had done exactly what needed doing today. I thanked everyone for listening, then calmly excused myself, leaving the folder of evidence with my father directly. I told him legal proceedings would begin formally, unless we reached fair repayment terms within the next 30 days. Walking away from that backyard felt strangely liberating, like releasing weight I had carried silently for many years. Aunt Carol drove me home, both of us mostly silent, processing everything that had just unfolded publicly together. That evening, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from relatives expressing support, sympathy, and long overdue understanding finally. Tyler texted me privately, apologizing again, offering to help repay whatever amount he could manage from his current job. I appreciated his honesty, though I reminded him the responsibility ultimately belonged to our parents, not him personally. 2 days later, my father called, his voice noticeably smaller, requesting another meeting to discuss repayment terms formally. We met at my attorney's office, where he agreed to a structured repayment plan spanning several upcoming years. He admitted, quietly and reluctantly, that watching relatives react during the party finally made him confront his own choices. Diane did not attend that meeting, apparently overwhelmed by public embarrassment following her exposed involvement during the confrontation. Over the following months, my father made consistent monthly payments, slowly working toward repaying what he had taken. Tyler, surprisingly, took on extra shifts at a local warehouse, contributing occasionally toward the agreed repayment arrangement voluntarily. Our relationship remained complicated, though something shifted once genuine accountability finally replaced years of comfortable family avoidance. I continued working as a nurse, finding purpose helping patients while slowly rebuilding trust with select family members carefully. Aunt Carol became an even more important figure in my life, offering steady support during this difficult transitional period. 6 months after the confrontation, my father invited me to dinner again, this time without any hidden financial requests. We talked honestly for the first time in years, discussing childhood memories, mistakes, and genuine regret without deflection. He admitted he had always found Tyler easier to parent, requiring less emotional effort than acknowledging my quiet struggles. Hearing him finally admit this truth felt validating, though it also confirmed years of feelings I had long suspected. I told him healing would take time, but I appreciated him finally speaking honestly instead of avoiding responsibility altogether. Diane eventually reached out separately, apologizing awkwardly, admitting she had prioritized Tyler out of guilt over past marriages. I accepted her apology cautiously, understanding forgiveness didn't require forgetting but simply allowed space for slow rebuilding. Tyler and I developed an unexpectedly honest friendship, discussing openly how favoritism had damaged both of us differently. He admitted feeling pressured constantly to succeed, knowing our parents had sacrificed my future to fund his repeated attempts. Understanding his perspective didn't erase my pain, but it helped humanize someone I had resented for many years. A year after the confrontation, my father completed nearly half of his agreed repayment plan, staying consistent monthly payments. I used a portion of returned funds toward advancing my nursing career, enrolling in a specialized certification program eventually. Watching my bank account grow from money legally belonging to me felt like reclaiming something long overdue and rightful. My hardware store visits with my father became occasional again, though now built on honesty rather than convenient avoidance. We never became perfectly close, but something resembling genuine respect slowly replaced years of quiet resentment and disappointment. On my 27th birthday, my father surprised me with a handwritten letter acknowledging years of overlooked sacrifice and effort. He wrote that missing my graduation remained his greatest regret, admitting no game ever deserved priority over my achievement. Reading those words brought unexpected tears, not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because honesty finally replaced excuses. I framed that letter, placing it in my apartment beside my nursing diploma, symbols representing very different personal victories. Tyler eventually returned to community college, this time paying his own tuition through consistent work and genuine personal effort. Watching him take accountability felt satisfying, proving consequences sometimes created positive change rather than permanent resentment between people. Diane and I remained distant but civil, occasionally exchanging pleasant conversations during family gatherings without deeper emotional connection. I learned that justice didn't always mean permanent separation. Sometimes it simply meant establishing boundaries built on truth. My career flourished as I earned a promotion within the hospital, finally feeling recognized for skills nobody previously acknowledged. I began mentoring younger nursing students, sharing my story anonymously, encouraging them never to sacrifice themselves for unfair treatment. Aunt Carol remained my closest confidant, reminding me regularly how proud my mother would have been of my strength. I visited my mother's grave more often, updating her quietly on everything happening within our complicated blended family. I told her I finally understood why she established that trust fund, hoping to protect my future independently. Standing there, I promised her I would never again allow anyone to diminish my worth or sacrifice quietly. 2 years after the confrontation, my father finished repaying the entire amount owed from my original trust fund. He hugged me tightly afterward, admitting he finally felt like he had truly earned back some fatherly respect. I told him respect had returned slowly, built through consistent honesty rather than empty apologies or convenient excuses. Tyler graduated college successfully that same year, inviting me proudly to attend his ceremony as a genuine gesture. Sitting in that audience, I felt surprisingly proud, understanding growth was possible even after painful family betrayal occurred. Afterward, Tyler thanked me publicly, admitting our confrontation had ultimately saved him from repeating irresponsible financial patterns forever. I smiled, realizing exposing painful truths had unexpectedly created positive transformation across our entire fractured family system. My father attended both our graduations that year, finally understanding milestones deserved equal attention regardless of favoritism previously shown. Looking back, I realized my silence throughout childhood had unintentionally enabled years of unfair treatment within our family. Speaking up publicly, though terrifying, ultimately restored balance, dignity, and long overdue accountability within our complicated family dynamic. I no longer carried resentment as heavily, replacing it instead with hard-earned wisdom about self-worth and boundaries. My relationship with my father remained imperfect, but honesty replaced years of quiet avoidance and painful favoritism. I built a life centered around purpose, integrity, and genuine relationships rather than seeking approval from those who overlooked me. Every graduation season now, I remember that empty seat, grateful it eventually led toward honest, hard-fought change. I still work as a nurse, finding meaning helping others while carrying forward lessons learned through painful personal experience. Tyler and I occasionally grab coffee, discussing life honestly, grateful our relationship survived truth instead of comfortable silence. Diane sends occasional messages, small gestures suggesting slow, genuine effort toward rebuilding something resembling authentic family connection. My father calls monthly now, asking genuine questions about my life instead of requesting favors or financial assistance. I forgave without forgetting, understanding forgiveness protected my own peace rather than excusing years of unfair treatment received. Sometimes healing doesn't look like reconciliation, sometimes it simply means reclaiming your voice after years of painful silence. I learned family isn't defined by blood alone, but by consistent honesty, accountability, and mutual respect over time. Standing today, financially secure, professionally fulfilled, and emotionally healed, I finally understand my worth was never truly negotiable. That empty graduation seat once represented abandonment, but today it represents the exact moment everything finally began changing. I walked away from that painful chapter stronger, wiser, and finally unwilling to shrink myself for anyone's convenience again. My story isn't about revenge alone, it's about reclaiming dignity after years of quiet, unacknowledged personal sacrifice endured silently. If you've ever felt invisible within your own family, remember your worth was never determined by someone else's attention. Speaking your truth, even publicly, sometimes becomes the exact catalyst needed for lasting change and long overdue justice.